I call the Honourable Member Moana Maki.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and I have some SOPs in my name on part one of this bill, and I too would like to voice my concern that this bill has not gone before a select committee, even for a very short period of time. Appreciate that the Minister wants to get this done quickly, but there wasn't any consultation with members on this side of the House. If the grand statements that we've been hearing about how it would be so wonderful we could get Labor to support it, well, if maybe Labor had been involved earlier on, so we could have asked some of these questions, then maybe that could have happened. But of course, there was never any intention or desire to have cross-party support on this issue at all, which is why that did not happen. There was no consultation with the local MPs, and here we are in urgency having to put a bill through. And I have to say, with the greatest of respect, having been through the Ruataniwha issue with this Minister, I don't trust, I'm afraid, some of the things that he says, bluntly. And that's why a select committee process, and as my colleague Ruth Dyson said, there's been a couple of issues where the Minister has done a sterling job, and we will always give credit where credit's due. But then we've also been burnt a fair number of times by this Minister, and the Ruataniwha was a classic example, and so we have deep concerns over some of the statements that have been made, the accuracy of those statements, how many jobs and how much wealth is actually going to come back to the West Coast due to this piece of legislation, how much money is actually going to go to conservation purposes from royalties, because whilst that's stated in the documents, there's nothing in the bill that requires that to happen. And I think we've just been burnt a few too many times by this Minister to be able to, at face value, accept everything he said to us, except that there is no ulterior motive here, and to support the legislation. And once again, as we keep saying time and time again, if this was about, as the Minister keeps saying, if taking a few logs out and bringing jobs to the West Coast, and if the proper protections were there, that would be absolutely fine. Why does the government keep deliberately overstepping on all these pieces of legislation? Because there are provisions in here that do not need to be in here, that are deeply worrying. And we're being told, well, you don't need to worry about it. You don't need to worry about it. There's nothing that members opposite need to worry about. Well, if that's the case, then why do they need to be in there in the first place? The provisions are obviously there for some reason, and that's why we have SOPs to remove and change some of the provisions in here. And the first one is to change clause 3 to reduce the time frame from 5 years to 2 years. And the Minister again has gave us his reason in the first reading speech as to why that was the case. Again, I would actually like to be able to sit down with officials and go through a lot of that stuff. I think that's what, albeit truncated select committee process, would have allowed us to hear from experts. Because, as a scientist myself, I know it's very easy to cherry-pick research. It's much better to be able to sit down with groups of people, and I'm sure that there are divergent views on this issue, as there are on many things, but it's good to get that expertise at a select committee, to be able to sit with people who know a lot more about this than we do, and to be able to actually hear from them what they think an adequate time frame should be. And, I was also concerned to hear the Minister during the first reading speech of my colleague Ruth Dyson, who was talking about the Conservation Act, to turn around and say to one of his colleagues, "Oh, that means we can never change the Conservation Act because it's been there for so long." And it worries me so we're now talking about changing the Conservation Act. This is the worry. The Minister nods. This is the worry, is that this is actually a stalking horse for something more. And the overstepping, if this was simply about what he's been talking about, taking a few logs out after a major weather event, bringing jobs to the West Coast, then that would be fine. But this is not what this legislation does. It goes so much further, which begs the question, there must be a reason why. And what is that reason? And when I hear the Minister nodding to say that the Conservation Act might now be up for review and discussion, despite the fact that's been settled since 1987, then that does make me concerned that this is, as I said, a stalking horse for something else. So we have reduced that time frame from 5 years down to 2 years, which we think is appropriate, but clearly acknowledge that we're picking numbers out of the air here because we haven't been able to have the advantage of expert opinion through a select committee process. Also an amendment to clause 5 to include the designated area maps into the legislation. A simple change, really, but they should be in there. They should absolutely be in there, and not sure why they weren't included in there in the first place. So I think when it comes, Mr Chair.
The Honourable Member Moana Maki.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'm not going to take too